Director of Content for ClearanceJobs.com, here today to talk about the book Dodgebomb. It was our July book club pick at Clearance Jobs. Very appropriate for July, 4th of July. A very appropriate title, Dodgebomb, about the Iraq War. And what was the subtitle? Outside the Wire in the Second Iraq War. We are joined today by Darren, who is the author of Dodgebomb. Thank you so much for joining us to chat about the book. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Lindy.
And so just my first question is kind of what got you started and interested in writing about the book. So it's a genre that we've covered here before at Clearance Jobs. You are also an Iraq war vet, so this is certainly something you have expertise on, but you chose to tackle it, from a fiction angle. So kind of talk about what prompted you to write the book, what maybe some of your inspiration was and why you decided to write.
Yeah, well, again, thank you guys so much. This is great opportunity and awesome. I started to write it as I was transitioning out of the Army in 2014, and it was like channeling that angst, right, into like something good and something positive, and to kind of like make sense of what I was doing and why I was like transferring over to the civilian workforce and getting out of the Army. It started off as like a series of anecdotes of, I'm angsty and disillusioned with bureaucracy and military inefficiencies and things. But then I realized that it'd be just much better if I framed it around the Iraq War instead of the Army or the military in general. And then I wanted to tell the story of my first tour overseas, but there's things you can say with fiction that you can't say in the truth, because usually the truth's much more boring or whatever. So I took a factual account, embellished it a little bit, and then that's how the book sort of became itself.
Awesome. So I think our mutual friend Steve Leonard, Doctrine Man, described it as you could smell the burn pit. Is that one of his descriptions? Because it was very much like you kind of get dropped into Iraq and through the course of the book, and you're following this Lieutenant Fitzgerald as he's kind of getting his first combat experience out of West Point. And you capture kind of that cross section of like, you want to be there, especially somebody who graduated West Point, but then you're also, you're encountering all the, bureaucracy of the military. And it was a good mix of like, you certainly described the mundane aspects of a deployment. So it's something that's, I feel like, was it kind of hard to find that middle ground of somebody who's been deployed is going to read this, it's going to resonate, but also somebody who's never been deployed is going to read this and understand enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, Lindy. Because I mean, as I was saying, it's sort of like rehashing old, war stories, but I wanted to target it towards like a civilian audience, to explain the Iraq War, because that was part of the reason for writing it too, is talking to people, getting out, and you're like, I'm an Iraq War veteran, and they're like, what does that mean? And you're like, this was a pretty epic event, in our nation's history, and they're like, I don't remember that at all. So that was kind of the point of putting just like a fictional, like generalist character protagonist in the mix of the Iraq War, so that any reader can pick it up, whether it's a crusty old veteran remembering a burn pit, or if it's somebody new that's just like, I don't know much about this, and to give them that experience without inundating them with like military minutia or other things that could just, turn people off to it.
But I did love it. My favorite part about a book, I'm the kind of person that always reads the end notes, and the acknowledgments and end use. So you have a nice, like, the rank structure and the acronym list at the back is near and dear to my Army civilian veteran heart, that you have those in there so that you can still, you can use the military terms within the book. And then for somebody who's like, what in the heck does this acronym mean?
I'm glad you found that, because occasionally I have civilian friends who are like, I didn't realize there was a glossary till I finished the book. And I was just like, it would have been a lot easier reading it.
It would have explained so much. No, and I think it's like, I think you highlight, especially as an Iraq war vet, I think that's a unique experience, because we had 9/11, which we're heading, into the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So Afghanistan, was a factor. And then now we're talking about Afghanistan again with kind of, the the American withdrawal from Afghanistan, and people forget, like, oh, Iraq happened in the middle there, and we
There was
talked
this thing called Iraq, yeah,
a lot for a long time. When you think about foreign policy in the Middle East, I mean, Iraq is a very significant location, but I feel like in the news, it's not something that I hear about. And I think the book goes into that because, Lieutenant Fitzgerald has his interactions with, the Iraqi, military and kind of all the interplay. That was probably one of the more interesting parts for me is you have these, the Iraqi nationals and how he interacted with them and their role in terms of like how the American troops are trying to interact with the local population. Maybe speak to how, like, writing that, how you picked which characters you were going to include there and kind of get the Iraqi perspective along with the military perspective.
Yeah. I mean, because I think that was instrumental in counterinsurgency. Like we worked with, because as people who've been to the Middle East know, there's two different types of Muslims, right? There's Sunni and Shia. There's like Protestant and Catholics, within Islam. And again, like explaining what Iraq and like Muslim culture is that during our tour, we interacted with Sunni militiamen, sons of Iraq. And they were just, Iraqis that were fed up with jihadists and Al-Qaeda, and they were like fighting back. But again, this was sort of a paradigm shift for them because Americans were the evil, invaders, the infidels. And for them to do that 180 in reversal. And I wanted to illustrate like real members that we found and we fought with and we collaborated with, because in the book, those sons of Iraq, Jalil, Abid, and Ali, like those were real guys. And like we broke bread with them and we patrolled streets with them. And they were really funny and like energetic, warm people. And I think something lost when people look at the news or whatever is they miss people's culture and humanity, and they're just like, who are Arabs? Well, they're these like weird Muslims that just want to blow themselves up. And it's like, no, not at all. And to showcase those guys and those real people just caring about their country and wanting to clean up their streets and do things, I thought was just again like a nuance of the book that needs to be discussed in this genre instead of, oh, we were just bombing bad guys or whatever, silliness that people think at like that first layer.
Yeah, no, the direct cultural engagement and the, and kind of the interaction with the local populace has to be a big part of it. And I'm trying, like, I want to make sure I say it without like without teasing it. So you certainly have a point at the end where Lieutenant Fitzgerald is kind of, is feeling what you explained at the very beginning of the call. Like, I just did this and experienced this, and is it worthwhile? And because you're dealing with, I mean, the difficulty of dealing with another culture and dealing with people whose affiliation or interest is not necessarily, the same, or their historical perspective is very different. Mm-hmm. And you have, one of the sergeants there is kind of encouraging, Fitz, like, hey, we're giving these people a chance of democracy. It's not our fault if they screw it up. It's still like worthwhile. Does that convey like what your sentiment is now as an Iraq vet, or were you being more optimistic through your character than perhaps you might feel yourself? If I can ask you
that. I'd say both. I'm going to answer all your questions with both or all, all of the above.
You politician, you.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, some of that is hindsight. But I mean, that's what democracies do. They export democracy. That's what a lot of our wars are, is trying to build democratic institutions in countries. And it's not like cynical empire building or whatever. And I think that's an explanation that gets lost. You say that to people, that doesn't really resonate. They're like, okay, whatever. We were going bombing bad guys and chasing oil or something. And you're like, I think that idealism and that American exponentialism is there. But it's very hard to sort of relate. And most of the people, whether veterans themselves or whatever, sort of in the weeds, they miss that. So yeah, part of that was glossing over the Iraq war a little bit and having that conversation so that people can look on it a little rosier instead of just, we deployed and there's blood and treasure lost and then we came back.
Yeah. So again, this is Lindy Kaiser with Clarence Jobs. We're reading Dodgebomb and discussing the book with author Darren here. He's so Dodgebomb. It's got the cover. He's got the poster behind him, the shirt. I do have to say, as a person who buys a bottle of wine for the label, I would read Dodgebomb for the cover. So shout out there. I do think it's like the font. I'm a font person as a content person. The cover, the font, it's very good. It's a great job there. So I thought it was interesting, and I made a note of this, and I feel like now maybe I get it wrong. So I was only till page 84 where we talk about, it dawned on Fitz that this whole time he hadn't fired his M4. So like you kind of start to the slow buildup of like, I think, especially kind of coming as a West Point graduate, not to throw the West Point grads under the bus. I mean, delightful people, but I will. But you have all of this knowledge of combat. I mean, you come in, can I say it, with the most, knowledge of combat, and you're walking in with this academic experience.
Yeah.
I feel like you kind of, teased that a little bit, that you also have this like desire to experience it yourself, like what you've actually studied and getting it onto the ground, but it's not necessarily like instantaneous. You're dropped into the field and like you're right in a combat situation. So maybe even kind of speak to that. I think maybe you might have an awareness that like if you're a service member, you're deployed, they're just dropping you in there, like you said, to blow up things and shoot. But it took 84 pages before he got to pick up his M4 and do something serious.
Well, that's also the misnomers of combat and reality, right? Even this like gung-ho West Pointer thrown into combat, like that's not combat, or that's not deployment. It could be a lot of just waiting for nothing, or maybe something never happens. And that's what I sort of try to like punch holes in some of those myths and expectations, because there's satire and there's unheroic actions where soldiers are making fun of their lieutenant. Like that's impossible. He's this smart West Pointer that's a leader. And they're just like, shut up, sir. You're an idiot. That most people outside of the, military industrial complex, like don't get, but like, that's an American thing, right? We don't have a caste system where officers are infallible. And also too, as the reality is that as a lieutenant, he's probably more important on a radio, doing command and control than he is being a rifleman. And that's something I wanted to show, that his sergeants are the ones laying down fire and moving up the Bradleys and taking out Al-Qaeda. And what he really should be doing is just coordinating with them and talking back to, his captain and other echelons to make sure everything's going okay. And those sergeants probably couldn't give a crap if he's firing his rifle or not, because maybe he probably can't shoot as well as them anyway. So like, shut up, sir. Just talk on the radio, kind of a thing.
Well, and they might prefer it. You have that perspective, like they want him to do his job so that they can, they can do their job. One of the biggest problems is when everybody else is trying to do each other's job. That's when we get in trouble. So, no, I thought it was interesting, the interplay that you have you have the officer versus enlisted, you have the command structure, the higher ups, the headquarters command folks. It's again, near and dear to my Army heart that one of the biggest conflicts was over PowerPoint slides. Mm-hmm. So, it's true. Like that, but that kind of irrational kind of, that was kind of where the jadedness comes from, I'm sure, where you have this like interplay of like, we're in a combat zone and somebody's mad that the fonts don't match, for instance, or things like that. But I know from, working with people in the military, like that kind of stuff happens. So, maybe speak to that, some of those kind of, little, the minutia of some of that, and why a presentation becomes, important in the scheme of combat.
Yeah. And it's these higher level officers trying to have control over these combat, leaders at a lower level. And maybe there's a jealousy that a colonel's not, engaging troops, like, engaging enemy, with as like a lieutenant or a captain might. And then them trying to manipulate and control with what they have. And this strange military bureaucracy still seeping through, when anyone common sense wise would be like, how does this relate to winning the war? And as I illustrate in the book, like, people losing their minds over parking spaces or PowerPoint slides, or this military discipline, and tiny little details that any rational thinking person is like, this no longer makes sense. And yet we still have to do it because we're the Army, we're the military. And I thought, the book would be lacking if I couldn't, poke a little fun at that, because that's real life, and it's not always blood and guts and charge the hill. It's a lot of, the sergeant major yelling at you because your uniform doesn't look right, even though you've been on patrol for the last 16 hours or whatever.
Yeah. Well, everybody has bad days, even in a deployed situation. So if you come across the wrong person at the wrong time, you have some of those examples. And yeah, you kind of would think that everybody's operating at a different level, but probably you see like under stress, some people can thrive in those environments. And I do think it does really break or crack some people, like the veneer that they have. So it's like not everybody is capable of succeeding and doing well under the stress. And and how do you know until you actually deploy and go over there in some cases?
Yeah, that's a really good point of like a field army versus a garrison army. And some people do well in one and can't succeed in the other, and vice versa. And that's something too you can see with our present day military is as we pull back from Afghanistan, Iraq, wherever, is the people that excel are the people that are doing great on the parade field, that are, doing the PowerPoints. Whereas the break glass in case of war people, they can't really adjust or succeed as well because it's just it's completely different skill set. So.
Yeah. And so you talk in the book a little bit in the end of kind of about, making a decision to leave or stay. And it's not like clear, what goes on, but there is kind of a conversation again between Fitz and between one of the sergeants about making the decision and how you make the decision to get out. So maybe, again, was that another kind of, were you processing your own experience or talk about your own decision in terms of, I'm not a lifer. I'm not gonna stay in. There's something else for me outside of the military. And how, like, I did appreciate in the book, it left it kind of, it showed that both paths are like great paths to take. Like, it wasn't like, you had two people in there who were making different choices, who didn't necessarily have different motivations or levels of commitment or levels of patriotism. Like, it wasn't like, one was just more hua than the other. It was just, hey, this is better for me and this is better for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, a little bit was maybe hindsight justification or just using it as a tool to process what I was going through. But, a lot of people, West Pointers, many people, they join the military as, a profession for their whole lives. And I came to the realization halfway through that I was like, this really isn't fun anymore. I hate being in the Army. And, I achieved some goals, but I was like, I need to get out because I don't believe in it anymore. I don't believe in the garrison Army Mickey Mouse games anymore. And that's very difficult and not something easy to process, right? It's not like, oh, okay, I'll just go do something else and completely change my livelihood. And, so that's why I discussed it. And that's why, those two characters have that conversation. Because it's a very real transition and problem a lot of guys and girls go through, right? It's just that they intend on staying forever. And then for whatever circumstances, they need to get out. And that mentality shift from soldier to civilian is hard. I wanted to justify both sides about why everyone, chooses what they do. But if I didn't bring it up, I thought I'd, just not doing credit to what a lot of veterans feel and experience.
Yeah. Well, no, I think it's worthwhile because certainly you see the cycle go through at the beginning of the book. This lieutenant is very gung ho about, again, putting his academic, experience into action in a deployment. And then by the end of the deployment is like, no, I don't, when I was never in the Army, but I worked for the Army, and I used to call it like the dancing monkey. Like sometimes you just had to be the dancing monkey if you're like, it's just like, this is government. And again, I feel like I love you, government, but this is just some of this happens across a lot. There's just things that you have to do. And are you willing to be the dancing monkey? And I say that in like the most complimentary way, but you're either willing to do it or you're like, no, I'm not. I can't do the dance that they're wanting me to do.
Yeah.
So,
well, I also wanted to show that you can be a civilian that cares about America and cares about a lot of things. You're just not affiliated anymore with the government or military. And that's also kind of the disconnect sometimes people too, is like, what, once you're out, you're out, you know, you're either in or you're out, you know, and it's just like, it's like, no, you can proudly serve. And then you can say, I'm on to the next best thing and I'm going to be a citizen, which again, a lot of people don't realize, or they have to go through a whole, you know, brutal process and write a book about to realize.
Well, and you mentioned that too, kind of that civil military divide. Now, you know, again, hindsight being what it is, do you think that you would have, whether it's career or just life, the experience without having, you know, that military experience? Do you still, even if there were negatives about it, do you still value that time that you spent?
Oh, 100%. I wouldn't give it up for anything. You know, like the Army gave me so many opportunities, in like West Point, like, you know, grad school, and just so many definitive life moments that like shaped me. And I think I would not have, I mean, I wouldn't have chased adventure and, you know, chased non-monetary goals and things, that when you're younger, you don't sort of, you know, really care about as much without the military. And even in hindsight, if you're a little cynical and you're like, oh, this person was mean to me in the Army and it wasn't fair and they, you know, like whatever, you could be like, I mean, I am so happy where I'm at in life and it's all because of the journey, right? So even if, you know, the Army was brutal and also great, you know, it was still at the end of the day, like the best job I ever had. But I don't want to be in the Army anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel the same even as from my side as an Army civilian. I think I did, it was in the GS-7-9 career track and working at the Pentagon and kind of wanted to have that Army civilian, like maybe I'll be the Secretary of the Army someday, or, you know, an SES. And like, I loved the military. I loved the culture. I loved the experiences, but there reached a point where for me, from a career perspective, it just no longer fit. And no longer fit like what I wanted to do. But I look back and say, like, the especially the people I met, hands down, I still am in touch with the people I met working for the Army years later. And they're still some of my favorite people. So I say, like, you can't, you know, I think sometimes we underscore how much relationships impact our career. And I do think that military culture and experience, even for me, not having served, I can't claim that, but just that the culture of even the Army civilian community, and to some extent, I think, you know, the contractor community, we got to do a shout out with clearance jobs because everybody's working in the NatSec field here. There is something unique, and, you know, and yeah, I think I can't think of anybody who's left that says like, oh yeah, and it was like, I never should have done that. Probably because of the relationships, or there's something that you take away.
Yeah. That culture, that family, that professionalism. I mean, again, it's amazing with people we served with in the military, or you could just have, you know, one bad day, or you only knew them for 6 months or something, but there's still that connection that you can meet years later and be friends and just talk about things that I think in our civilian, you know, jobs and relationships, it's just harder to establish those bonds. So yeah, 100% agree with you there, Lindy.
Awesome. Well, those are my only questions. I feel like if I keep asking more, I'm going to reveal the entire plot. But Dodgebomb, hopefully you read it with us. If you don't, there's still time to get it. It's a beautiful cover. You're going to want to have it in your house. Was there anything I didn't ask about, or any last closing thoughts for me, Darren?
I mean, I just, again, really appreciate, and that's part of that whole sort of like military culture and community, Lindy, is how Clearance Jobs reached out and was like, this is a great book. Let's help Darren promote it. So I just want to thank you guys so much, you know, for, you know, plugging my little Iraq war novel, Dodgebomb, Outside the Wire in the Second Iraq War, by me, Darren Pepple.
It's good. I think so. I think like we need to get some like high school. I feel like I didn't give it to any like high school kids. If you're in high school, kids, children. I know how you like to be called that. I feel like this is a book. There's a little bit of profanity. High school kids can handle it. It's okay. But like, I do feel like there's enough to learn here. So I think like that's even a great like takeaway too, that, I love the Army and kind of know some of the nuance, and it was interesting to read. But I think if you're kind of wondering, like, wanting a book about from that perspective, again, a young person, a lieutenant coming in, and the full circle of life. So we have to learn from that. We have to learn from people who have hard experiences and become jaded and then come out of it, because that's life.
That's life. Get ready for it, kids.
Now that we've spoken to the children, Darren, I feel like our time is up. But again, Dodgebomb, read it. Thank you so much, Darren. Appreciate what you do. Appreciate your sharing your story. And we hope other people will read it. July's not over yet.
Lindy, you're awesome. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks.